Disclaimer! This video discusses charged topics such as racism, misogyny, and sexual harassment. It also discusses very old controversies that have since been put to bed. All parties involved have thoroughly grown past this, or even taken actions to alleviate the damage, and I do not condone any harassment towards them. Diokovawa and Mwinhai.
I want to take a few months off, see the trash in other countries, maybe get some fancy foreign coveralls.
What's the worst that could happen? See? No consequences!
Hello there! Plague Von Karma here with a new episode of RBY Bytes. You all really liked my Uri Geller video in spite of my anxieties in uploading it, and my poll said you really want a Jynx video, so here I am. Let's not beat around the bush here. This is Jynx's original design, and it's often said to be racist. You know it, I know it, everyone and their mother knows it. No ifs, no buts. But now for some actual bush beating, because I need to get some facts out of the way. The definition of racism varies in scope in academia, but it always includes prejudice or antagonism towards other ethnicities, and this will be the focus of my video. Many people who discuss racism allegations often talk about the intent and personal beliefs of someone who does something racist, and uses this to give them plausible deniability. Here's the thing, regardless of someone's intent and beliefs, their actions can contain racism, much like how you can inadvertently patronise somebody. Not being racist doesn't suddenly mean you're immune to doing something that is. If the system is racist, the default is to mirror it, not because a person holds the beliefs, but because they have been taught that set of behaviours. The behaviour and its effects can provoke justified reactions of hurt and antagonism, and they can harm certain racial groups, regardless of whether or not they acted with intentional, bare-faced racism. For example, many career politicians who do racist things do so because there's money in it, not because they personally hold the beliefs themselves. As you can imagine, it is difficult to ascertain whether someone genuinely holds racist beliefs, because it is wholly on them to admit it, and they obviously won't if they do. Ergo, when I'm discussing racism applied to Jynx, rather than trying to pin racist beliefs onto any one person, I'm discussing the design, the effect, and how it is perceived. These are what actually matter, and where the reactions come from. We good? Nice. So let's go over the design origins here, which are a little unclear. I've seen theories about Jynx being related to Yama Uba or some sort of Viking or opera character, but none of these theories seems to hold water. The most likely origin I've seen discussed is the Japanese fashion style of gangolo, but this started in the mid-90s and declined in the 2000s, but not before getting some offshoots like Yamamba and Mamba. If Jynx was based on this, then, well, gangolo literally translates to blackface. There's a reason that style doesn't decline so quickly. There is documentation of Jynx's design dating back to the early 90s, as most designs were finalized quite early. Given this, there was no time for Game Freak to make a design based on gangolo, so it doesn't make sense. Jynx just cannot be a gangolo Pokemon. What people miss about gangolo is that it's actually a subtype of an older and much larger fashion subculture, Gyaru-kei. Gyaru-kei is a family of Japanese fashion styles that were introduced to the country by an American company called Lee, the name Gyaru being a transliteration of the American slang term gal, thus my pronunciation. Women who adopt the style are called gyaru, and men who do so are called gyaru-o. It rose to prominence during the 1970s, which is an era that many Pokemon designs are derived from. For example, the original design for Beedrill, an unnamed beetle Pokemon, used the English City Gent style with bowler hats, which peaked in the 1970s. Gyaru-kei is very striking in aesthetics, featuring copious amounts of fake tan, blonde dyed or bleached hair, and traditionally non-conformative clothing. Non-conformative fashion is a commonality in Japan's circuit of delinquent fashion trends, though the contrast of tanning and light hair colour is what distinguishes Gyaru-kei from the rest. This is why Jynx has blonde hair. It's commonly seen as a symbol of rebellion, as Japanese schools usually demand all children dye their hair black, aiming to reduce personal differences as much as possible, and thus classroom conflict. This is mostly done against dyeing one's hair in general, but can unfairly apply to those with, say, naturally blonde hair as well. Gyaru-kei styles are often worn by teenagers, with adults who wear the style being dubbed Gyaru Mamas. Jynx's Japanese name is Rougera, which is a transliteration of the French colour for red, rouge, which could also refer to rouge makeup, playing into its Giallo aesthetic. Giallo-kei itself is controversial from a lot of angles, with some expressing that it's just blackface, as well as weird weeaboos saying it's the Americanization of Japan? I don't understand that point, at all. Anyway, there are many Giallo who stress that neither of these is intentional, but I have also seen arguments from the opposite end, and as expressed before, intent does not disqualify something from being potentially racist. It just means the person themselves isn't. Giallo aren't racist, but Giallo-kei could be. The thing that confirms Giallo-kei as Jynx's origin is the location of its cultural hotspot, Shibuya Hakyūkyū, a large department store that sells tons of Giallo-kei clothing in addition to tons of other merchandise. Game Freak has always been stationed in Shibuya, so it is likely that seeing the offbeat style is what inspired Jynx's appearance. While there are numerous types of Giallo-kei, I had trouble finding a particular type that applies specifically to Jynx. Hell, Giallo rarely applies so much makeup that they look like the boot polish slathered faces of the minstrel performers of the 1800s. I do have one theory that this could apply to though. In Pokemon Stadium, Jynx's fainting animation implies that the black was not meant to be the skin after all, but a face floating in darkness. This hasn't been referred to before or since though, and Jynx is seen touching its face among other things in other media, so maybe this was a scrapped idea or just something that they thought was funny. From a spriting perspective, Jynx was likely made black due to the way the Game Boy works with Pokemon color palettes. RBY uses 2-bit color palettes, or 4 colors, 2 of which are always going to be black and white. Jynx takes this and uses it in an interesting way, using black to color its face, and then reserving the 2 extra colors for the hair and dress. Thus, you end up with a uniquely tricolored Pokemon. This is, in theory, a good way to design a sprite representing the Giallo that you would see around Shibuya. However, consequently, the design was perpetuated into official artwork, and later, the anime. Let's contextualize this into a timeline. In 1997, the anime episode Denno Senshi Porygon was aired in Japan, and the prominent strobing from virus vaccine missiles being exploited by Pikachu caused hundreds of people to experience epileptic seizures and be sent to hospitals. Following extreme backlash and new strobing regulations directly stemming from this episode, Game Freak and Nintendo scrambled to improve their PR. During this time, there were numerous controversies building and more to come, but not yet related to Jynx itself. Why is this relevant then, you ask? I believe that Game Freak changed Jynx of their own volition because its role in some media was significantly scaled back during this specific time period. Some artwork in a December 1997 issue of Corocoro showed the Kimono Girls dancing with Jynx, with a tagline implying that it will play a part in summoning Ho-Oh, much like how Jynx operates in Pokemon Snap with Articuno. So it's likely that the Kimono Girls were Jynx trainers, contrasting their geisha-like appearances with Jynx's Giallo-kei style. It's possible that this is a remnant of a scrapped plot point that was rolled back when Game Freak realised that Jynx is not a very marketable Pokemon. During Pokemon Gold and Silver's development, Smoochum also had a radically different design, looking like a literal baby Jynx, which was later changed to the little pink creature released in the final game in 1999. It's notable that Smoochum may have been made with the idea of Jynx being a Giallo Mama, as Giallo Mamas often dress their children like Giallo from a very young age, though this itself is sometimes seen as very controversial. But as those in the know understand, in 1999, much more was to come. In April 1999, Mary C. Norton published an article in the Washington Post called Pokemon the Dark Side. She describes the way the official Pokemon handbook talks about Jynx, which describes it as wiggling its enchanting hips and putting opponents to sleep with lovely kiss. She doesn't elaborate further and says that Pokemon shouldn't be boycotted, but encourages having a conversation about the entertainment industry's darker sides rather than talking about video game violence, which was the style at the time. It is notable that in Pokemon Red and Blue, Jynx is stated to wiggle its hips seductively, something that is transferred into Leaf Green and vaguely gestured towards in other games as late as Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Looking at Jynx's other Pokédex entries, it's just not very good. They seem to frame Jynx and by extension Giallo in general as like hookers or something. It's very misogynistic. Mary C. Norton had a very good point here, and it just got drowned out of the news cycle. Later on, watching holiday hijinks with her child in December 1999, Carole Boston Weatherford, a children's book author and culture critic, was first exposed to Jynx. Soon enough, in January 2000, she published an article on Jynx's design, calling her an overweight drag queen incarnation of Little Black Sambo. Little Black Sambo is an 1899 children's book that was later made into a film in 1935, doing immeasurable damage to the black community by birthing numerous harmful stereotypes that still persist to this day. She goes on to discuss Japan's past cultural sensitivity, and even notes that Jynx's English name, a corruption of Jynx, could be taken as a connection to witch doctors and voodoo, things she asserts are rooted in African religions. Specifically, voodoo is a corruption of West African Vodun, a religion still practiced in Africa today. Looking at the etymology of Jynx myself, it appears to be rooted in the Greek name for the redneck bird, Jynx, which was used in divination and other rituals. The bird likely got this name from a Greek sorceress called Jynx, but spelled differently. It's possible that Weatherford was referring to the character Jynx Hoodoo though, being described as a curse to everyone in the musical comedy Little Puck, circa 1880. Hoodoo is a set of spiritual beliefs brought together by enslaved Africans of different religious groups, and in my research it appears that this play is what eventually led to the word Jynx as it is currently understood today in an American context. I couldn't find much information on the character, but in a newspaper article about the play, I did see the wording monkey-shaped fetish, which does sound very, very odd. It's stated 1888, the height of the segregation era, so it's possible that Jynx Hoodoo was a minstrel type character, but I couldn't find anything conclusive. Because Jynx Hoodoo is said to be a bringer of bad luck in Little Puck, in American culture, specifically in black communities, hex, curse, and jinx are all often fraught with connotations towards religious groups from the African continent. Overall, I believe that this is what Weatherford must have been referring to. I contacted her for comments, but didn't get an answer in the month I spent researching this video. I did try to have someone reach out to her on Twitter, I don't have an account on it, but still nothing. Weatherford produced a follow-up article in May 2000, but it didn't seem to add much to the Jynx conversation beyond the previous already scathing report, outside of comparison to Mr. Popo, character from Dragon Ball, also frequently met with the same ire. Watching Holiday Hijinks for this video was quite a disturbing experience for me, to be honest. The first time you see Jynx, it's stealing one of Jessie's toys and leaving her house. Not even a minute later, you see Ash trying to capture one, which is standard for the anime, but does not work with Jynx for what I hope are easily understood reasons. Then you see how it uses Lovely Kiss against Pikachu, Brock, and Ash within the space of a minute, which can be seen as something like sexual harassment, to be honest, and considering Ash's age, it can be taken in a lot of weird lights. Like, they just attacked and tried to capture it, including electrocuting it with Pikachu, and now it's trying to kiss a 10-year-old boy? This sort of thing happens a lot in early anime episodes, but from a human-shaped Pokemon and being portrayed so favourably, it just doesn't work. Like, it seems to make light of the discomforts. The joke is just sexual harassment, that's all there really is, there's nothing else to it. Brock works somewhat better because he's promptly shut down, often violently, which can be seen as teaching him a lesson, even if he doesn't really learn. Here, you don't have that. Instead of making a joke about what happens to perverted men, you have a joke about a boy being on the receiving end. A young boy at that. Later, Jessie and James kidnap the Jynx, and then they see many of them working under Santa Claus, which could have slavery connotations. Keep in mind, there are a lot of weird cranks who argue slavery is consensual, and Pokemon are captured, so it's not just one negative way to take this, there are a lot of them. It never really picks up from there, I'd put it down as one of the worst episodes of the Indigo League season, even with Jessie's world building, which seems like a net negative regardless, compared to what James would receive later. With that, I find it very hard to dispute Weatherford's commentary, and I would even argue that she didn't go far enough. It's easy to draw comparisons between Holiday Hijinks and Zwarte Piet, a controversial companion to St. Nicholas that's roleplayed in Dutch folklore through putting on dark makeup. Indeed, outright blackface. Though it's notable that Zwarte Piet only became controversial in the past 10 years, and while some are passionately against actions against the character, online advertising platforms have still banned him. Jynx in Holiday Hijinks was a companion to Santa Claus, so in practice, intentionally or not, this is what they were depicting. They were just making Zwarte Piets. While not in the episode itself, Jynx's indecipherable language is also something that could be seen as objectionable, drawing parallels to the attitudes that people have taken towards African American vernacular English, or say, languages like Swahili. So why did this happen? At the time, and arguably still to this day, Japan had a very homogenous society. I've even seen some political pundits call it an ethno-state, though I'm not sure if I'll take it that far. Nevertheless, Japanese people do not have anywhere near the same level of contact with people of colour that you see in, let's say, America. Only around 2% of Japan's population are foreign nationals, and 0.02% of the population are people of colour. That number's at around 25,000. The small population of people of colour in Japan also means that those who live there have much quieter voices, just by numbers alone. Therefore, many of the stereotypes that you see in the West, such as Little Black Sambo, or the characters in the Sentinel 11 of Looney Tunes, were not exposed to a Japanese audience on a large scale. Thus, they never had the same conversations and protests about cultural sensitivity and racism at that point in time. Ergo, what you see here is a difference in levels of association, causing a society to largely ignore these issues. It's not like people of colour in Japan accept this either. In my research, I've seen plenty of stories about how unnerving the ignorance can be for them. Many who go to live there even just leave. The isolation of Japanese culture compared to the rest of the world means they tend to just not know what a person of colour is. In Japan, due to this isolation, it's common to have very surface-level perceptions of other cultures, which leads to stereotyping and appropriation being much more common and accepted. They just don't know any better, because most of the time, they will never interact with or form ties with a foreign minority in their life. So when seeing a person of colour, what they see is something fresh that they can try and imitate, giving them a sense of difference from those around them. Remember, hair dye is so popular among teenagers because they are taught to have zero differences from each other. This logic even extends into the country's legal system, but at that point, we're going into a whole other topic. Point is, it's not malicious appropriation, it's just ignorance. So, Yellow K is most certainly racist and bad, but I wouldn't put it on the same level as blackface in the United States, for example. I extend the same judgment towards Jynx. It takes the racism of Yalu further, but it certainly isn't unapologetically racist, like the horrors of American blackface. Perhaps you could say it's 90s Japan's cultural perceptions incarnate. It's 90s for a reason. When looking at Japan's landscape at the time, considering that Pokemon Red and Green were not initially pitched for a worldwide release, understanding people of colour wasn't necessary for its business plan. Naturally, this became false when it became a worldwide phenomenon, being exposed to, well, a worldwide audience. This is why I said that racist behaviour is what should be discussed. What isn't racist to ethnically Japanese people could be racist to the audience that is receiving the content, and this is why post-globalization, many companies now hire cultural sensitivity correspondents. If you want to reach a variety of people, there is zero reason not to employ them. We can extend the same cultural attitude to Jynx's womanly features and how they were treated by Game Freak. In the 1996 Pokédex book, published by Game Freak themselves and featuring old lore, it's mentioned that attempts were made to upskirt Jynx, and it violently resisted and felt a sense of shame. Indeed, sexual harassment in a children's book, with very naive commentary at that. This is derived from pantula, the word referring to flipping up women's skirts to see their underwear, which has been commonly depicted in Japanese manga since the 1960s, particularly towards teenagers, and this extended into an extremely prevalent sexual harassment problem that has only recently begun to be cracked down upon. You've heard of the women's underwear and vending machines thing, right? Yeah, they're called burusela, which is part of Japan's really creepy prostitution market that most frequently targets teenage girls. Yeah, that's how bad it is. It paints a dark, almost dystopian picture of what it's like to be a teenage girl in Japan. Once again, Jynx reflects 90s Japan. Japan's cultural differences don't mean that women and people of colour shouldn't be offended by Jynx. That would invalidate their emotions, and is frankly a terrible thing to say to somebody. Emotions don't bubble up for no reason. In fact, overreactions are generally quite rare. Sometimes when people say that someone is overreacting, they're saying so from a comfy position that is isolated from the actual situation, and thus the context. Being empathetic and open to understanding people's bad feelings is good. Like, there was a sexual harassment depiction here, and Pokemon is meant to target a broad demographic. Inclusivity is common sense with a target audience as broad as Pokemon's. It isn't their fault for being taken aback by Jynx. It's Game Freak's fault for making Jynx in the first place. If you don't want people to feel caricatured, make tasteful designs that are in touch with the people's cultures. Make better designs. Talk to the people you're basing your designs on. Only the most basic of market research is necessary here, and that's why today, you see companies employing those cultural sensitivity correspondents. The mass offense taken meant that conversation was warranted, and that conversation resulted in a lot of changes to Jynx's position in the Pokemon franchise. After Weatherford's report, all Pokemon media featuring Jynx at the time had to be censored for Western releases, including Jynx's appearances in Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal, which were still in development at the time. There's even evidence that its blue artwork was changed during this era. When Pokemon Stadium was released in 2000, it received a 1.1 release later that changed Jynx to have its purple face as well, something that will persist in all Western releases of future Stadium titles, including Colosseum and Gale of Darkness, which will keep the Black Jynx model in Japanese releases. Additionally, Sabrina's Jynx, from the Gym Challenge expansion of TCG, was also censored by Wizards of the Coast, which apparently resulted in a delay in its release. As of Ruby and Sapphire, Jynx is purple in all main series games. Holiday High Jynx was banned, and the dubbed episode has never been shown in its original format ever since. Plus, in May 2002, the 250th anime episode, The Ice Cave, was unaired in the West due to its prominent featuring of Jynx, making it one of the anime's few banned episodes. Its censored design would be seen in 3 later episodes, but likely due to some minor backlash, Jynx has not been shown in the anime since 2006, which is interestingly the same year that Kadabra saw its last appearance. However, in December 2012, on its 15th anniversary, Holiday High Jynx was re-released, with Jynx changed to reflect its modern purple design, making this version the new standard. All Virtual Console re-releases of Pokemon games with a black Jynx in them have also seen changes. Pokemon Snap, the TCG Game Boy game, Pokemon Yellow, and Japanese GSC have all had Jynx changed to its purple design. Interestingly, this makes Jynx the only 5-colored sprite in Pokemon Yellow. It's also notable that Jynx, despite often being paired with the other Punch Yokai, Magmar and Electabuzz, hasn't seen the same treatment. While Switcher was made, Jynx didn't see an evolution in Diamond and Pearl at all. It seems that attempts were made to revive Jynx, with an unused Jynx Cry with Mega Refurb being found in Pokemon Home's files. However, nothing has come of it, and I think it's likely that this is a remnant from an old revision of Pokemon X and Y. Personally, I think that leaving Jynx behind is for the best. Many people really don't like this Pokemon. And rightfully so, the original Black Jynx has been all but dead for 20 years. Regardless, it's very hard to shake off these origins, to the point that whenever Jynx is mentioned, you usually see people bemoaning this old controversy. However, when I see this, it seems to be from a strange, reluctant acceptance, or a belief that the controversy was outright wrong. I kind of hate that, honestly. I think the controversy was very much deserved, and Pokemon as a franchise got off very easy. I'd wager that the language barrier was half of what kept it from receiving the backlash that it would receive if this happened today. Truly loving something means being able to analyze and accept its flaws, so I believe that most people who discuss this controversy should do it from an acceptance, and, learning from it. If you find yourself asking the question, why did Game Freak censor Jynx? Ask yourself this. Why market a Pokemon whose design ends up stereotyping a group of people, intentionally or not? All this does is reduce your reach. If you don't want controversy, make better designs, and in this case, the bad design was rightfully discarded. At the end of the day, Pokemon aren't real people or animals, they don't have real feelings, and thus I find it hard to feel sorry for Jynx. I personally appreciate Jynx's changes, thus why in my video I never use its original design unless it's to discuss its roots. It's just an unacceptable design. The comments here are likely to be filled with a lot of emotional charge, but please, be respectful. Remember that there's another person on the other side of that screen of yours. Unless they're racist. This was Pokemon Karma, and I'll see you all next time.